Hey there, my name is AJ Pickett and I make deep dive lore videos on Dungeons & Dragons monsters, exotic fantasy locations, the history contained in various world settings, and magical artifacts, among other things. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up icon. If you feel like you like what I do, subscribe to the channel. That's all I ask in return. Come on, it's free and it means a lot to me, it really does. Okay, today, a classic gotcha monster from the first monster manual, which someone just requested a video on as I was halfway through writing a script, so it's finally my turn to feel like my mind is being read from afar. The gas spore, present in every edition of the game, basically unchanged. Well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The gas spore is a perfectly simple monster that exists for perfectly logical reasons. However, it is wrapped in a lot of mystery. It is a fungus that was created by magical means, by beholders possibly, long ago. A lot of modern scholars of exotic creatures think that gas spores happen to look the way they do because they were mutated by spawning from a dead beholder at some point in the past. Maybe they got tainted with far realm energy. A freak occurrence, a random chance. This is not actually true. I'm not dismissing the 5th edition version or its lore, it's just that they were created deliberately and with good reason, as we shall learn. Those looking for proof need only try and find the buoyant gas sacs inside the creature that allow it to float. Well, there are none. The gas is there, but it's not lighter than air, which when you think about it would go against the intended purpose of the gas. No, the gas spore floats in exactly the same weird and otherworldly manner as beholders do, because they were designed and engineered to do that, using the aberrant physiology as a reference. There ends the argument in its tracks. We shall double back to that later and I'll reveal what actually happened. The gas spore is a decoy. It's an unintelligent but complex floating plant and fungus puffball that exists only to spread its spores. The beholders took advantage of their own fearsome reputation and the gas spore's explosive method of spore dispersal to craft a floating fungus that looks damn near identical to a beholder, even to those who have encountered beholders before, because as we all know, no two of the monsters look exactly the same. It's very easy to err on the side of caution and viciously attack the creature at close range with everything you've got in order to kill the thing before it hits you with a bunch of its magical eye beams. As soon as lethal damage is applied to the gas spore though, it rips open with an explosive blast and shoots spores into the flesh of any creatures within the blast radius. I'm sure they do inhale quite a few of the spores, but it's actually propelling them into the skin and muscle of creatures around them. This is how the gas spore reproduces, and it's quite effective. So much so that gas spores today look and move far more like beholders than they originally did, and those that look less like beholders were not as successful at reproduction, so they got weeded out in a natural evolutionary process of survival of the sneakiest. Since their creation, they have spread far and wide, repopulating through their infestation ability, and what they don't tell you about gas spores is that their spores can be collected and preserved with a DC 20 Arcana skill check, remaining just as potent and effective and used as a very nasty, lethal form of contact poison. More on the effects of that stuff later in this video. The ecology of gas spores is quite interesting in that they differ so much from the fungus that we are more familiar with on Earth, thanks to sharing a lot of plant traits as well. Though they're not lichen, they're a different kind of plant-fungus symbiote that we call a fungoid. Gas spores tend to congregate in areas where they have plenty of food, as they're scavengers and grazers who consume a wide array of organic materials, but they do this for a purpose. In the Underdark, they tend to feed on mould and lichen growing on walls and rock surfaces. They also feed on tree leaves and the scum that floats on top of stagnant ponds and bogs of the surface world. Sunlight doesn't bother them in the least, and they can be found in a wide variety of locations. They feed using special rhizome growths, which are bits on the top of them that look like the beholder's eye stalks. But a rhizome is a modified subterranean plant stem that sends out roots and shoots from its nodes. Rhizomes are also called creeping root stalks or just root stalks and include edible varieties such as ginger and turmeric. But in the high fantasy worlds of Dungeons & Dragons, the rhizomes of the gas spore are more closely related to the supernatural mandrake root, one of the most dangerous plants you can usually find in an alchemist's workshop, typically with a large sign saying, "Do not touch." A gas spore is typically about 8 feet or 2.4 meters across, but weighs only 50 pounds or 22 kilograms, thanks to being mostly hollow, filled with highly pressurized and toxic gas filled with spores. However, The spores are not just contained inside the body. According to the 3rd edition aberration sourcebook, Lords of Madness, when gas spores sense a nearby creature as large as a gnome at least, they immediately approach and attempt to infest the creature with spores. Smaller creatures are usually ignored. A gas spore attacks by slamming into a creature with its body. Upon contacting a target, thousands of tiny rhizome filaments lash at the creature's flesh and infest it with spores that immediately grow into the flesh, burrowing like worms. As mindless creatures, gas spores pursue their selected target relentlessly or until slain, or until the target escapes beyond their limited range of sight and they just run out of steam. They can see in all directions with a form of blind sight, sensitive to heat fluctuations and such. They are impossible to blind using intense light. They don't rely on light to see. This limits their visual range to only about 30 feet though. Once they start tracking after a target, they continue to drift in the direction of where they last saw it, even after it moves out of range of their blind sight. And typically, if a group of gas spores are seen floating along with what looks like a purpose, that's simply what they're doing, just following the last thing that disturbed them. In 5th edition, their hovering flight speed is listed as 10 feet per round, though it used to be 20 feet in older editions, so feel free to have some varieties that are faster or slower as you see fit. In 5th edition, they only have an armor class of 5 and a single hit point. They're not durable things, though they are immune to poison, can't be knocked prone, paralysed, frightened or deafened. They're not completely deaf, but they can only sense fairly intense vibrations in the air close by. In our latest edition, they do have a touch attack option. This takes the place of the infest action of previous editions. The gas spore has no bonus to hit, and the impact will only impart 1 point of poison damage, but a living target must make a DC 10 Constitution saving throw or become infected by spores. The more common result of an encounter is the death burst, where a gas spore simply reduced to 0 hit points will explode in a blast that forces every creature within 20 feet to make a DC 15 Constitution saving throw. If they fail, they take 3d6 poison damage and become infected with spore disease. If they succeed on the save, they take no damage at all, and the creatures immune to poison are also immune to this effect. I'd argue that those standing adjacent to an exploding gas spore would take 2d6 bludgeoning damage if they fail a DC 15 dexterity saving throw, or half if they succeed. That makes sense to me. It's optional though. I'll talk more about this in more biological detail towards the end of this video. Spore infection was a far more serious situation in earlier editions, but it's still no joke in 5th edition. The infected victim has 1d12 plus their constitution score in hours before the spores reduce their body to brown mush that bursts out 2d4 tiny gas spores that grow to their full adult size within 7 days. While infected, the victim suffers from the poison condition, and the only way to prevent their death is to have the disease removed, typically via magic, but there are also some alchemical means if the victim can find it in time and the DM makes it available. According to the early texts on gas spores, such as the Dungeon Magazine issue 28 published in 1991, where the gas spore features in an adventure which has the exploration of a Mind Flayer Spelljammer ship, a nautiloid, that shows up near Neverwinter Wood on the world of Toril, gas spores can be summoned by even a relatively inexperienced mage who learns the technique, but the trick is combining the gas spore with some other simple magical effects. The ability to cast illusions as well is highly effective, as the mage can make it look like an actual beholder is firing a magical ray from its eye stalks, and where the ray strikes a target, it turns that thing to stone, even if it is nothing more than an illusion of stone over top of the thing. The preconception and fear of adventuring humanoids makes them very predisposed to believing what they are seeing, to the point where they will actually fall prone in shock of suddenly gaining a spreading stony appearance after one of these illusionary magical rays hits them. Their companions might go diving for cover from the deadly eye rays. Meanwhile, the gas spore just floats in closer, ready to detonate. Dragon Magazine issue 150 has a Dragon's Bestiary article by Stephen Innes, which provides even more information of the otherworldly origin of gas spores, tied into the Spelljammer lore once again. And this perfectly explains why gas spores tend to just ignore the presence of mind flayers. And I quote from page 12 in the article titled "All Life Crawls Where Mind Flayers Rule." Gas spores were apparently developed as part of the illithid defense array. Domestic forms, though mindless, ignore illithids but approach other life forms. The resemblance to the beholder is too close to be coincidental, partially since beholders are notorious allies of illithids in the Underearth. Despite this, gas spores are found on illithid homeworlds, while beholders are not. Possibly beholders have been eliminated from their homeworlds by the illithids because of their inherent potential for danger, or perhaps the illithid worlds are simply too windy for beholders. I find that a bit far-fetched. Other hypotheses have been advanced as well, that gas spores were developed in the Underearth and have spread to other illithid habitations, or that beholders and gas spores were both developed by illithids. That last bit is considered unlikely. I agree, that last theory is 100% unlikely. There certainly is a relationship between gas spores, shriekers, violet fungus, beholders and myconids though, as they are so often found in close proximity to each other in the rich, steamy and noxious fungus forests of the Underdark. The Mind Flayers are responsible for so many mutated, creepy and predatory creatures. Their spooky and utterly cruel biological splicings and twistings are works of genius and often result in very viable new species. In the gas spores, their spread is so much more rapid and potentially disastrous than most people care to imagine. What is standing in the way of these simple and hardy plant creatures from wiping out most humanoid species entirely? I'm very much reminded of the science fiction story of the predatory Triffid plants, and how, combined with the effects of a mass-blinding meteor shower, they became a creepy doom for humanity. The gas spores, as I mentioned, can be gathered and preserved via simple alchemy. According to the Lore of the Forgotten Realms penned by Ed Greenwood in Dragon Magazine 120, published in 1987, the best information on them is contained in the Bestiary of Creatures Strange and Wonderful, a tome of unknown authorship presently in the library of Piergaron's Palace in the city of Waterdeep. Here we learn that among scholars of faerun, the gas spore is called the Aniatha, classified as a fungoid. There is some interesting info here, such as the fact that the Aniatha fungoid derives energy from visible light, particularly sunlight, and feeds on other plants to gain chlorophyll, necessary for this process, which is why they feed on pond scum and leaves and lichen, and cellulose, which they use for structural growth and repair. In this, it's no different from the luminescent crawling night moss and other ambulatory fungus growths found in the forests and thickets, and it's just as unintelligent, but an Aniatha has the unusual natural ability of levitation, and floats slowly about, turning so as to absorb the maximum amount of light in the vicinity, sunlight if above ground, or torchlight or phosphorescence if in subterranean regions. Areas of continual light radiance often serve as an underground lair for gas spores. Gas spores only live for about 5 or 6 years when they're highly active, but they can go into a state of suspended animation and float motionless for centuries. The false eye of the Aniatha, so called because of the external resemblance to the central visual organ of the beholder, whose magical powers of course the Aniatha doesn't share, is indeed a sort of eye which enables the creature to orient itself to gain the maximum possible available light, identify food and navigate through its surroundings. The interior of the gas spore is a hollow cavity filled with gas, in which a cloud of rhizomes is suspended in whirling motion, nourished and protected. These reproductive spores are produced on the interior surface of the gas spore and released into the gas storage bladder when fully developed. Here they swirl at a constant temperature and pressure until a tentacle of the gas spore touches the flesh of a warm-blooded mammal and forms a suction seal. The tentacle then jets a burst of the internal gas and the rhizome spores into the target before the tentacle pinches off the pressure at its base. The rhizome spores, as I mentioned, can be collected and preserved with a substance that mimics some qualities of the internal gas and can make a powder. A typical gas spore yields 1d4 doses of usable gas spore powder with a DC 20 Arcana check. Failure by 5 or more results in the gas spore's explosion and the destruction of a supply of spores and possible infection of the person who's harvesting them. Gas spore powder is a dangerous poison that costs 500 gold piece per dose. Anyone who dies of this poison will spawn 2d4 tiny gas spores as per usual. The powder is a contact poison that requires a DC 12 Constitution saving throw, or the victim gains the poison condition, and their hit point maximum is reduced by 1d4 points per hour until they either make the saving throw or die once their hit point maximum reaches 0. Even those who do recover are still infected by the living rhizomes and will need to have a cure disease spell cast on them within that 1d12 plus their constitution score in hours time limit. I know it's not exactly the most deadly toxin, but it's about as close as I can get using the 5th edition rules. Feel free to modify that as you see fit. One unusual case exists in the official lore. In the late 15th century DR, the deep gnome Zoblob, owner of the old Zoblob shop in the dock ward of Waterdeep survived the detonation of a gas spore in the Underdark, which caused him to inherit a few beholder mannerisms and memories. This must have been very unpleasant. And that sums it up for the gas spore. And now, if I can ask you to do me a favour, in the description text under the video is a link to my Kickstarter. If you're not yet aware, I have created a range of silicon battle mats which are a standard international A1 paper size, so pretty big, and they have a 1-inch square grid on one side and a 1-inch hex grid on the other side. They are super durable, good for a lifetime of use. I even tested one as an oven mat on which I cooked a pizza, and then I put it through the wash with my laundry. It's environmentally friendly, you get a great deal if you're one of the first 2,000 backers. You get the battle mat, a generic character sheet for any RPG, and a combat tracker for any RPG, as well as a big sturdy canvas carry bag that will fit all of your gaming gear with ease for only $40 US. Thank you very much for your support. Subscribe for my weekly content, wear your geek with pride, and as always, I'll be back with more for you very soon.